session on global compliance or global chaos, navigating risk management strategies for GCCs. In this session, we're about to explore the complexities of managing compliance across diverse regions and industries. We'll also dive into the challenges GCCs face in areas such as cybersecurity, data privacy, labor laws, taxation, and environmental regulations. We will also take some time to discuss the risks of operating in multiple countries and regions and examine how GCCs can adopt proactive strategies to mitigate these risks, ensuring operational efficiency while staying compliant. Ladies and gentlemen, our speakers are here. Please give them a huge round of applause. Please join me in welcoming Karnikeya Budhwar, Head of Group Continuity Risk at ANZ Bank, in conversation with Jayant Saran, Partner at Deliotte, India. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. A huge round of applause for them, please.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in for this session. Post-lunch sessions are always fun. But thank you so much to Alter for waking all of you up with that fabulous presentation. And we hope to keep the momentum going here. One of the big things we often talk about, and it showed up in the previous set of slides as well, is on compliance and risk. As a risk professional operating largely in India, I can tell you it's not easy to navigate. So if I'm working, just in India, it's a tough one on its own. But the moment we start going across borders, the moment we start serving more than one country or one jurisdiction, I think the whole, I wouldn't say problem, the whole challenge seems to expand multifold. So I'm privileged and thrilled to have Karnikeya on stage with me, an old friend, and someone who's been doing this for many years for ANZ in a global role, operating out of India. So I'm going to just throw a couple of questions at him and let him do the magic in terms of talking about what he does. Now, Karnikeya, how does global compliance work? Specifically when you're operating, like in the case of your bank, in 38 countries, right? It's not going to be an easy one, right?
No, it's certainly not an easy proposition. And like Jayant said, we are a global bank in 38. Like Jayant said, we are a global bank, 38 countries. We have different sorts of licenses in all those countries. In some places, we're a full-fledged bank. In other places, we are more a sort of an institutional bank. So it's not easy. And when you're dealing with complicated, difficult things, the best way to do it is to keep it simple, because otherwise you start tripping over yourself. So the way we do this is it's a unified approach. So we have an industry taxonomy that we use. It's basically 16 themes. Every regulation that we have to comply with, falls into one of those areas. And for each of those areas, we have dedicated SMEs. These are deep experts in those areas whose job it is to understand what's changing and then translate that into internal rule sets. Now, the important thing for us is that because we're a big bank and because we're responsible, there's a lot of systemic risk sitting with us. For us, our internal rule sets have to often go beyond what just the regulation is asking us to do.
Actually, that was a question I was going to throw to you.
Okay.
You have multi-jurisdictional regulatory expectations.
Yeah.
It's not as if there's a one-size-fits-all. So what may happen in, let's say, Vietnam would be very different from what may happen in one of your European businesses. What may happen in Australia.
Correct.
What may happen between Australia and New Zealand, considering you are ANZ.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
No, absolutely. So, but you often find this, and this is where it gets interesting, because we find that global regulators, at least in the banking space, are talking a lot more to each other. So there's often waves of regulation that you see. Like resilience is an interesting one that we're dealing with at the moment. There's a lot in other spaces as well. So it's in some ways it's become a little bit more predictive. Like you see, like some legislation we're dealing with right now in Australia. New Zealand's just announced that they are adopting the same thing, and it actually came from UK via Singapore and Hong Kong. So that's just one example. But coming back to it's a single. We find that a single rule set where you can have a single set of policies and standards in the bank that everyone just needs to follow, and as long as you follow that, you're confident that you're meeting multiple different regulatory requirements in the same rule set. So that's how we like to roll it out. What that does mean is that in some places you're over complying. You are you're doing things that you don't need to, but that's because you're meeting an ANZ standard, not because you're aspiring to a local standard. And in some places the rules go a little bit further, and in those places we have bespoke rule books that we write for those geographies. So that's how we deal with it. And then all of this allows us to write controls, which then get subjected to testing, and that's how we basically prove compliance. Yeah.
Okay, so now for the fun questions.
Sure.
We've had the introduction done. We've got 5 minutes, 20 seconds to go. So I'm going to ask the fun questions now. So beautiful that you have a strategy globally. Beautiful that you've got everything working, in different parts of the world. How do you deal with setting up something in a singular location?
Yeah.
Where you may have people who may not be fully conversant, fully familiar with the regulatory demands to start with.
Yeah.
In each of these jurisdictions you operate with. So what is it, and how do you sort of deal with not just the external regulatory asks, but how do you also deal with your own people in those countries? You'll have CROs in those countries, you'll have people in those countries. How do you get them to have faith that a model like this could work?
Look, it's not easy, because what already happens to a large degree in the GCCs is the assurance work, things like testing of controls and those sort of activities that give comfort. But the rule writing doesn't happen here, or at least not at scale, and that more sort of higher order work of understanding legislation and translating it into requirements, that doesn't happen here. I think the way we are looking at it is, firstly, if you keep that unified approach going, then it becomes easier to teach a set of people one way of doing something rather than multiple ways of doing something. It becomes easier to then have synergized common capabilities that you can invest in, and then give them exposure. Someone said earlier that commercial acumen piece, because just reading legislation doesn't tell you what that means without understanding the underlying business process that it has to be applied to. So that takes investment in people, which we are prepared to do, and give people exposure so that they can learn that. But the real kicker is, how do we build more automation in all of this? And that's sort of the way, regulatory compliance is headed, where, you're not relying on humans to you're relying less on humans to understand what the regulatory landscape is. You're getting information fed to you automatically. You're building automated controls, you're automating your processes, and that capability is much more amenable to be building that here. Yeah.
Building here as in from an India standpoint. So, considering a large part of the audience here are from the GCCs, I think one of the conversations that I've had specifically in the area of risk with many of the people that I've spoken to, not just here, but in the events that we've had in Delhi and in Hyderabad. One of the things that came up also was the hunger to expand what we do from a GCC standpoint. So what's the advice you would have? One, of course, is the AI and technology bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And considering the fact that you've sort of arrived at creating a base here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the advice, or what is the suggestion, inputs you may have, let's say to the audience here, in terms of how do we bring more of that capability, both in terms of willingness and second, willingness is beyond mandates. I mean, there could be a mandate that this needs to come to India, but how do you create that willingness and that agreement to do that? And second is, of course, AI, the analytical ability, automation, all of those are great. But is there something specific that you guys have done to be able to help you do that a little more effectively?
Yeah, I think you have to prove capability before people are willing to give it up, and the only way to do that is to do that, and that means finding places, small places in the bank, like where we have digital offerings or where we already have a significant process presence in GCCs, find ways to prove that you can manage end-to-end compliance in India. And we do it already in a lot of places, like a lot of our financial crime and so on and so forth is done here. So I think proving it, and then leveraging that to give confidence to transition more. I think that's key. The other bit is getting involved in some of the foundational things that need to be resolved before you can get into AI automation and doing things that way. I think that's probably the key opportunity here at this point, is to help build that capability, and then from there will come the trust, to rely more on GCCs for things like
The
global.
trust is key, right?
The trust is key. Trust is key, and people capability is key. That end-to-end acumen, understanding of how the processes work, not just the legislation, but what the spirit and the intent of that is as well.
No, fabulous. Thank you so much. Conscious, we have 20 seconds to go. Just throwing it up for any questions anyone may have for Karnikeya.
Post-lunch.
Post-lunch. No, fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karnikeya.
Thank
you
you.
so much for your insights. I think great conversation. Thank you all. And hopefully it was a useful session for you.
Thank you all.